August 3rd, Air Force One lands. Trump walks up to the microphones and says the biggest attack since World War II, canceled. Iran has agreed. A deal on the Strait of Hormuz is imminent. Every wire ran it. CNN, Bloomberg, Fox. Same headline. Breakthrough. 6 hours later, a spokesman in Tehran walks up to his own podium, Esmail Bakai, Iran's foreign ministry. He says 9 words. We are not negotiating with the United States. One of them is not telling you the truth. That is arithmetic. In the next 30 seconds, I am going to show you it isn't a lie. It is a pattern. This is the 10th time it has run since February. The Iranian press already has a name for it. And the reason it keeps working is hiding in ship tracking data any of you can pull up on your phone right now. Because while the cameras stayed on Hormuz, Iran and the forces around it moved on 3 of the world's maritime choke points in the same week. Not 1, 3. Hormuz, Bab el-Mandeb, the approach to the Suez Canal. I am going to walk you through all 3, name the cycle nobody in cable news will name, and end tonight in 1796 on the day George Washington described this exact moment. Not something like it. This one. In the next 26 minutes, I am going to give you 5 layers. Stay with me. Before I show you the ship tracking data or take you back to 1796, I need you to install one concept in your head. Because once you have it, the last 6 months of Middle East headlines stop being chaos and start being a pattern with a name. Think about a landlord you know. He sends the tenant an eviction notice every 3 months. He never files the papers. He never shows up in court. After the 3rd round, the tenant stops taking the letters seriously. After the 5th round, the tenant stops paying rent. The landlord still believes he is in charge because he is still writing letters. Everyone else on the street knows he isn't. That is the shape of the last 6 months. I am going to call it the threat retreat cycle, 4 steps. Watch how tightly it runs. Step 1. Washington issues an ultimatum. It goes out on Truth Social or from a lectern. Something about the largest attack since World War II, oil markets spike. Cable news cuts to breaking news graphics. Step 2. Iran does not move. No withdrawal, no de-escalation, no phone call. The strait stays closed. The launchers stay dispersed. You watch the horizon for a strike that does not come. Step 3. 3 phones ring in Washington, Riyadh, Doha, Abu Dhabi. Trump has said this out loud himself. He called off the August strike at the request of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. Those are the 3 capitals whose oil terminals sit inside Iranian missile range. If those terminals burn, so does the global economy. Their call is not a request. It is a veto. Step 4. The strike is canceled. And then, this is the part I want you to memorize. The retreat is announced as a diplomatic breakthrough. August 3rd, 2026 was the 10th time that cycle has run. And by Al Jazeera's own August 4th coverage, Iran's own military has now openly said what it does with each round of ceasefire. It uses them, maximally, to rebuild. The first piece of evidence is the one every wire buried. On August 3rd, in his weekly briefing, Iran's foreign ministry spokesman Esmail Bakai took questions in Tehran. His line, reported by IRNA, Bloomberg, Al Jazeera, and The Business Standard, was that there are currently no negotiations underway between Iran and the United States. What is underway is a bilateral track with Oman on management of the Strait of Hormuz. Not with Washington, with Muscat. About Iranian management of a strait that used to be neutral water. That is the compression. You were told a breakthrough had landed. What actually landed was a correction. The second piece is the ceasefire pattern, and the source on this is not a hostile analyst. Al Jazeera's August 4th write-up. Headline: Maximum use. Iran boosts military strength during ceasefire with U.S. Carries the on-record admission from Iranian military leadership that previous ceasefire windows were used to import, repair, and produce weapons. U.S. intelligence assessments reported by the New Arab, Kiev Post, and Bloomberg put Iran's retention of its pre-war ballistic missile arsenal at roughly 70%, and its drone stockpile at around 40%. Every truce Trump has celebrated as progress is, by their own military's account, an inventory refill. That is your compression. Iran told you what a ceasefire is for. The third piece is Bab el-Mandeb. On July 20th, the Houthi movement declared a naval blockade of the strait, targeting Saudi, Israeli, and U.S.-linked shipping. 2 days later, on July 22nd, Houthi military spokesman Yahya Sari announced strikes on 2 Saudi oil tankers by name, the Ancelia and the Layla. A Saudi news agency later confirmed one was set ablaze. Ship tracking firm Kepler measured a 34% drop in Bab el-Mandeb traffic within 24 hours of the blockade announcement. Windward tracked 4 Saudi cargo vessels, 3.8 million barrels of crude, gas oil, and naphtha between them, turning around before ever reaching the strait. Saudi Arabia's Hormuz bypass, the east-west pipeline built for exactly this contingency, now empties into a corridor no insurer will underwrite. The fourth piece is the newest, and in my read, the most consequential. On July 29th, at roughly 3:20 in the afternoon Central European Time, a drone struck the U.S.-owned floating storage tanker Energos Winter at the port of Damietta, Egypt. The fire spread to a second vessel, the gas-log Salem. Both crews evacuated, no injuries. Egyptian authorities confirmed the incident was drone-caused. No group claimed it. Damietta sits at the northern edge of the Suez Canal approach in the eastern Mediterranean. Read the geography plainly. The Mediterranean was the safe map. It is no longer. If those 4 pieces slotted into place for you the way they did for me, hit the like button on this one. So here is the apparent answer. The threat retreat cycle has run for the 10th time, and the thing being negotiated is not a return to how the world worked before February 28th. It is the terms of the new arrangement. Bakai made this explicit in Tehran. According to Iranian Foreign Ministry statements as reported by Al Jazeera and IRNA, the talks with Oman are about management, Iranian management, of transit through Hormuz, not restoration, management. 20% of the world's seaborne oil moves through that strait every day. Japan sources roughly 3/4 of its crude through it. China, around 40%. India, around 60%. When we say Iranian management, what that means concretely is that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' naval forces get some form of say over which flags, which cargoes, and which destinations enter the Persian Gulf. That is not a diplomatic breakthrough. That is the terms of a strategic handover, dressed up as one. Here is what makes this the emotional peak of the story. The retreat is not being framed as a retreat. It is being framed as leverage that finally worked. The pattern this president is following is the pattern of a country that has decided the cost of executing the threat is higher than the cost of losing credibility. That is a defensible position. It just isn't the position the podium is describing. When the Air Force One statement calls a canceled strike, a deal is imminent, and when the country the deal is supposedly with says publicly, hours later, that no such deal exists, the language has come loose from the situation. Once language and situation come apart in public, the situation is the thing your adversaries plan against. Iran's own hardline press already understands this. Kaihan, aligned with the clerical establishment in Tehran, ran an illustration this week of a car's gear shift locked in reverse with a Trump silhouette at the wheel. I am not endorsing that outlet. I am telling you the image is legible. Adversaries who can draw a joke about your posture have already priced your posture. That is the thesis. It is the apparent answer. Hold it. It is going to break in about 4 minutes. Before the twist, comment with the number of diplomatic breakthroughs you can name in the last 6 months. Anywhere. Here is the fact that breaks the thesis. Hormuz isn't closed. I mean it literally. Iran declared closure in early March. Every major carrier, Maersk, CMA CGM, MSC, Hapag-Lloyd, suspended transits. Protection and indemnity insurance was canceled for March 5th. That is all documented, all in the record. And yet, according to Windward's own maritime intelligence reporting on the Iran war since March, ships still transit, selectively. Windward has publicly documented cases where 2 Chinese-owned COSCO ultra-large container ships were denied passage near the IRGC-controlled corridor on March 27th, and other cases where Chinese-flagged tonnage moves through without incident. According to reporting circulating this week on the July 20th to August 2nd window at Bab el-Mandeb, the asymmetry is even starker. Reporting puts the number of Chinese-linked transits without incident in the low 20s against 4 Saudi tankers hit in the same fortnight. Honestly, that specific 22 to 4 figure comes from tracking data I have not been able to independently confirm at the vessel level, and you should treat it as a directional signal, not a settled number. The direction is the point. Ships are not being blocked at random. Some flags get through, others get hit. If closure was closure, none of that would be visible. What you are actually looking at is not a closed strait. It is a permissioned strait. It is an entry list, administered by whichever forces in Tehran hold the levers. The moment you can describe it that way, the diplomatic frame Washington is running collapses. You do not negotiate with someone who has closed a door. You negotiate with someone who is charging admission through it. This story is still moving. Subscribe so you have my next breakdown the day the first Iranian delegation actually shows. A captain on a Japanese-flagged VLCC out of Yokohama used to file his voyage plan a week ahead. Sailing time to the Gulf, roughly 18 days. He had a favorite bakery in Fujairah, where he'd stop between transits. Bread that reminded him of a place his mother took him as a boy. He hasn't been to Fujairah since February. His ship now runs south, past the Horn of Africa, around the Cape of Good Hope, and up the Atlantic. 28 days at sea instead of 18. He no longer files a week ahead. He files a month ahead. The bakery is still there. He isn't. And a U.S. aircraft carrier, the George H.W. Bush, took the same detour around Africa this year to reach the Middle East. When your carriers reroute, you have already seeded the map. Now, because I never want you to just take my framing, I owe you the best version of the argument that says Trump is right. In its strongest form, not a strawman. The case runs like this. Argument 1. Avoiding a nuclear-adjacent war is the job. A strike large enough to matter risks oil at $200 a barrel, a global recession, hundreds of thousands of dead, and years of unfinished business in the Gulf. A leader who cancels that under pressure from allies who would burn first is doing the responsible thing. Argument 2. Pressure is working slowly. Iran is talking to Oman. That is a conversation happening because the credible threat exists. Argument 3. Deterrence does not require executing threats. It requires them being executable. The military option remains on the table. I want to concede one of these on the record because a steelman that concedes nothing is a strawman. Argument 1 has real weight. There are wars a president should not fight, and the ones adjacent to nuclear thresholds are near the top of that list. But here is what the argument does not explain. A party that is genuinely being pressured contracts. Iran expanded. Since pressure began, threat coverage went from 1 choke point to 3 in the same week. Iran's own military has told you on the record that the ceasefires were rearming windows. The maritime data suggests the closure was never a closure. It was an admissions policy. From inside Tehran's chair, that isn't panic. That is a plan. If pressure was working, the map would be shrinking, not widening. That is the objection you can hold this framework against yourself. So, thesis and antithesis. The thesis said the cycle is a strategy that keeps pulling back from disaster. The antithesis said the closure was never really a closure, so what was being negotiated was never really a return. The synthesis is a rule you can carry into the next story in this niche. Here it is, once long, then once short. In great power confrontations, the party that publicly announces its restraint as an achievement, while its adversary is quietly redrawing the map, is the party that has already lost the round. What the podium calls a deal, the map is calling a handover. In this niche, the retreat is always announced as an arrival. Apply that rule to the last 6 months and it fits every headline. Apply it forward, and it will tell you how to read the next one. When the language of victory arrives before the fact of it, look at the map. The map is honest in a way statements are not. That is why the maritime data matters so much. Ship tracking doesn't have a press office. AIS transponders are not spinning. When your carriers, your insurers, and your allied merchant fleets are all recalculating their routes around a strait officially still under negotiation, the negotiation has been resolved. You are simply the last person in the room to be told. Hold that rule. It is the payload of this video, and it is also the reason it did not have to be longer. Test the rule for me. Comment with one recent headline where the retreat was announced as an arrival. Now the payload from the very first minute. The one I told you I would explain at the end. 1796. George Washington leaves the presidency after 2 terms and writes what becomes the farewell address. 2 ideas in that document read now like they were written this week. The first, what he calls passionate attachments to foreign nations. A nation that cultivates habitual fondness for another, he writes, becomes in some degree a satellite of it. It participates in the quarrels of the ally out of sentiment rather than interest, and it forfeits, in Washington's phrase, the right of independent deliberation. The second, no nation acts from favor. Nations act from interest. Any state that expects disinterested help from another, he writes, is expecting something that does not exist. Now apply this to August 3rd. Trump cancels the strike on his own account because Riyadh, Doha, and Abu Dhabi asked him to. That is one attachment operating on American decision-making. On the same map, Netanyahu says, on August 4th, reported by the Washington Post, Business Standard, and Al Jazeera, that Israel will not withdraw from its current lines in Gaza until Hamas has completely disarmed, pushing back on a deal Trump had just publicly framed as agreed. That is a second attachment, pulling the opposite direction. Ben-Gvir called the disarmament arrangement unacceptable. The coalition is holding on that word. The United States cannot fully satisfy either attachment. The Gulf capitals want restraint. Jerusalem wants room. Sources disagree on exactly how tight Netanyahu's coalition math is right now, and I want to be honest that political reporting on that is contested. On the direction, they agree. widen with me. What Washington described in 1796 isn't a warning about Iran or Israel or the Gulf. It is a mechanism. When a great power lets its strategic decisions be shaped by the interests of two allies pulling opposite ways, it loses the ability to act on its own interest. And the first sign is exactly what you are watching. Statements from the podium, the map does not confirm. Here is my falsifiable prediction. Watch the next 72 hours. If by end of day Thursday there is no confirmed in-person meeting between American and Iranian officials at any named location, then the cycle has completed its 11th iteration, and the imminent deal joins the previous 10. If a meeting happens and there is a real readout, I was wrong, and I will say so on camera. That is the deal. You hold me to it. Which leaves one question I want you sitting with tonight. If the language and the map have come apart in public, who is the strategy actually being explained to anymore? So here is the answer to the question I left hanging. The statements aren't being written for Tehran. They are not being written for Riyadh either. They are being written for you, the American voter watching the 6 o'clock news, because that is the only room left where the language and the map still line up. Everywhere else, the map is winning. I said 72 hours. By end of day Thursday, I need to see one confirmed in-person meeting between American and Iranian officials at any named location. No meeting, and this is retreat number 11. I will grade this on camera. Hold me to it. Subscribe so you get the Thursday grade in your feed the moment I post it. This isn't over yet. The next one is the windward data itself, unpacked. If Iran is running an admissions policy on Hormuz instead of a closure, whose ships are on the list, and what did they trade for it? That video is the passenger list. It goes up next week. 2 men, 2 podiums, 1 day, 1 map that isn't listening to either of them. Washington saw the shape of this room in 1796. The room hasn't changed, only the podium has.